Hi friends, this is the second video in the series covering the topic of risk management process. Let's try and cover the very first step involved in the risk management process, which is identification of risks, and try and unfold the why, when, who and how aspects involved in risk identification. Let's deal with the why part first. Why risk identification is important. Look, if you do not invest sufficient time upfront in identifying the uncertainties in your project, you get a lot of surprises, especially during the execution and control phase of your project, which results into a lot of stakeholder dissatisfaction, a lot of rework, project delays, additional cost, and a lot of the times become the major reason for project failure. So it is always wise for a project manager to invest some time upfront and identify the key risks involved in the project. Dealing with the when part, when risk identification is done, well, a good project manager will start identifying the risks right from the time the project is discussed. In fact, the project charter will include a very high level summary of the key risks involved in the project, meaning that the risk identification is done even before the project is approved for further planning and execution. It will be fair to say that majority of the risks are identified during the planning stage of the project, where the project manager involves a lot of the project stakeholders, speaks with the experts in the organization, speaks with the PMO department or the fellow project managers to learn from their experiences in the past. Having said that, there may be new risks identified during the execution or the control phase of the process. So in summary, it can be said that majority of the risk identification effort is concentrated during the early phases of the project, especially initiation and planning. However, there could be new risks throughout the life cycle of the project. Let's understand who is responsible to identify risks. Well, it's important to recognize the difference between responsibility and accountability. As far as accountability is concerned, it is the project manager who is accountable to run the risk identification process as defined. As far as responsibility is concerned, it rests with the entire project team. For example, a functional manager will be responsible to highlight risks related to the function. IT manager will highlight risks or identify risks related to technology. Similar for facilities manager or a admin manager or a HR manager who will identify risks related to recruitment or risks related to people. So the answer is yes, the responsibility will sit with the entire project team for their respective areas. The project manager will be responsible as well to identify the project level risks. However, as far as the accountability of the entire risk identification exercise is concerned, it rests with the project manager. Let's look at how risks are identified in the projects. Well, there are a number of techniques to identify risks across the board. Some of the common ones as per PMI include brainstorming, where a group of relevant people come together to generate new ideas and identify risks related to the project or to a certain activity. Another technique is checklist technique, where you can reach out to a big group. Imagine you have 200 plus stakeholders. You can't include all of them in a brainstorming exercise. So you create a checklist with a few general risks basis the organization experience, basis your own experience, and you roll out that checklist to all the 200 plus stakeholders, get the responses, compile, and now you have a very good view of the overall risk profile of the project. But mostly the checklist technique is clubbed with the other risk identification techniques, and you can't purely rely on the general risk identification. Another technique is one-to-one interview, where the project manager can speak with the subject matter experts or the sponsors or the executives in the organization to identify risks and learn from their past experiences. Another technique is SWOT analysis, which highlights the opportunities as well as threats involved in doing a project or a certain activities. Another technique is assumptions analysis. Look, when you do the projects, you make a lot of assumptions. A good project manager will invest some time upfront to identify the uncertainties involved in the assumptions that have been made in the project charter. Constraint analysis is another technique where the project manager will keep the constraints in the project. It could be related to the schedule, scope, budget, or quality, etc., which will help in the risk identification during the planning stage especially. One of the common techniques that I use in my projects is facilitation techniques, where in every governance meeting that I do with the team on the ground, I go around the table towards the end of the meeting and I ask all the team members to highlight top 2 risks involved in the work that they are doing or in the project. A lot of the times, it's an eye opener. You identify a lot of relevant issues or risks involved in the work that the team is doing. So that's a very powerful technique that I would recommend all of you to use. So that's about risk identification. Just to recap, we've looked at why risk identification is done, when risk identification is done, who is responsible to do risk identification, and some of the techniques involved in risk identification exercise. Hope this video adds some value to your project management experience. If you have your own learnings that you want to share, please post your comments in the comment section. And until I make my next video, goodbye and take care.